Hello again, this is the Java Programmer, and in our last video we talked about implementing a grammar for our parser, a grammar to parse our command line. And if you recall, these were our commands that we wanted to support. So config, index, repo, cluster, alias, snapshot, and quit. And so we talked about how we are going to use a parser, grammar parser / language creator called Antlr. And so let's start by setting up our project to have Antlr support. All right, let's add this dependency to our POM. So there we have our dependency added, and now let's add another dependency so that our code, this is the one that's used for, the runtime is used for compiling, and this other one will be used for being able to have it in our code. Okay, now that we have our dependencies added, now we have to allow our project to actually have a target that we can run to compile the grammar file. So let's add that now. Okay, so we've added our dependencies here in the POM file, and let's see if we can go ahead and run this on the command line. And so the way we run this is by doing a maven Antlr 4 colon Antlr 4 Antlr 4, and see if we can get it to run. And we've got a good target. Now you notice it says there is no grammars to compile in this directory. So let's go ahead and go make that. And well, first off, let's add this command to our makefile so that we can build this grammar whenever we would like. So in our makefile, we're going to make a target here called grammar, and it's going to be that. So if I say make grammar, we can run our grammar. So that's great. But now let's go ahead and make this directory. So make directory source main Antlr 4. All right. So if we make our grammar again, it's going to tell us that there's no grammar files in there. So now we need to go make a grammar file. So let's go into our target source directory, and now we need to make the same package structure as we have in our other one. So if we make / ElasticSearch CLI, and then we're going to create a directory called grammar. And we can make all these directories in one shot if we pass make directory a -p. And so now we're in our grammar directory, and we're going to create a grammar file called command grammar.g4. And we start off by defining what kind of file this is, and this is going to be a grammar, and we give it a command, give it a name, command grammar. Options, because we want to compile to Java code, we're going to set the language is equal to Java. And then we start to define our grammar. And as if we remember, going back to here, we have basically seven commands we want to do: config, snapshot, all these. So we need to define these. Started out by creating our grammar rules. So at the root, we're going to have a command, and that's what's going to be returned from our parser. So our parser is going to return a command object, and then we're going to call the execute method on that object. Now we're not going to get to that in this video. We'll get to that in next video. We will actually flush out this first command called the config command. We're going to bring in a library for reading configs, and we'll work with that command to start with. But here's how you define the commands. And so you just create these what are called rules, and they can be anything you want. They have to be lowercase. Rules are lowercase, and tokens are uppercase. We'll get to that in a second here. As we'll see right here when we get to EOF. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass the full command that the user types in directly into this, and it's going to determine, is it one of these 7 commands followed by the end of file, or in our case end of line, but it's the end of file as far as input goes. It's going to parse one of these commands and send it back so that the prior program can parse it. So I'm not going to bore you with typing all these commands in, but I'm going to just do it with the first one. So in our config command, we're going to have 4 options. So config, set, and then we're going to have basically a name value, but we're going to call it arg for now. And you'll see in a minute, I'll define what arg is. So we're also going to have a config print. We're going to have a config load and then a file name, but we're also going to call that an arg. Config save. We're going to be able to save our config out to a file name, and then that is our rule. Now, it might look a little strange how I have this formatted. That'll be clear once we go and implement that. So I'm not going to bore you with the other commands, but I'm going to type all those in now. So there we have our basic rules for how our commands are going to be run. So basically from the command line, config set name value, load from a file, index list, index info on an index name, switch an alias from an index from one alias name to the next alias name, index delete, index name, repo create. This one we'll probably have to come back to and add a few more things here. Snapshot list, snapshot delete. This probably needs an arg. Alias list for list the aliases on an index. Alias create on an index, an alias name. Remove a alias from an index. So remove index name and the alias name. Cluster. We want to be able to get a cluster config option, or set a name value config value on the cluster, and quit. So you can see that all of our our rules here start with a lowercase, and in each one of these we have an uppercase. And so these are what are called tokens to the parser. So we have to define them. So like, I'm not going to bore you with all of it, but for the first one, config, and config is the lowercase text of the textual string of config. And we'll go down and we'll define all these ones that we've used here. All right, so now that we have all our tokens defined, we need to define what an arg is. There's a couple things left to define. One is this arg, and what we're going to say for our arg parameters, typically we're talking about either a name value pair or index name or an alias name. And so we want this to be pretty specific. And so this is a regex rule, and we're going to say that it can be uppercase A through Z, lowercase a through Z, 0 through 9, or a underscore. And that's going to be primarily, and then we're going to have one or more of those. So that's what's going to define an arg. We also need to define white space, because between each of our terms, let's say, there is a white space character. So white space could be either a space, tab, carriage return, or a new line. And what we're going to do with those is we're going to tell the parser, okay, when you see those, skip them, because we don't care about trying to parse those. So that way, if there's multiple spaces between the commands, it shouldn't be a problem. And then we're going to define what the end of line is. And the end of line is a carriage return that may or may not exist depending on the system you're on, Windows versus Unix, and then a new line. And when we run into that, which would be the end of the line, when they hit enter, we're also going to skip that. And that should be it for our grammar. Let's go ahead and double check that our grammar can actually compile. So if we run our rule that we created, so make grammar, wrong directory. Let me go back up here a bit. So here, and hopefully we've typed it all in correctly, and there we go. You can see Antlr 4 is processing the directory. It processed our grammar file, and then what we want to see is if it actually generated out Java code for us. So we find that in the target under generated sources. In there we should see there's an Antlr 4. And if we look, there's our tokens. So if we look at one of these tokens, should be all of our tokens that we created and the text strings of them. We look at the Elixir tokens, same thing. And now if we go under our grammar directory, we'll see that it has generated out us a Elixir and a parser and all the different things that we're going to need to actually parse this grammar. So let's just take a look at one of these, Elixir.java. And you can see here's all the tokens that we defined, the text strings, and so forth. So our next goal here is going to be to actually make use of these files that have been generated. And so based on last time, we went in our we created this command processor. Here we're just processing out the command. So we're going to create another variable. So private. It's not going to return anything right now. We're going to call it process command, and it's going to take in string the input. Yeah, the input command that the user has typed in. And so here we're going to take this line, put it inside of here, and here we're going to process command, and it's going to be, in our case, the line. And here we're going to set a string line is equal to joiner dot toString, so we can kind of have the same, keep this sort of, call it an API, keep it the same. So now both of these are going to, let's just make sure that this works, and our command is our input command. Let's just make sure that we can build all this. Oh, wrong directory. I need to get used to using the NeoVim file browser. Right, it's building it up. Okay, let's just try it. This is a test. Seems to still work. That's great. Okay, so now we need to make use of our parser to actually parse this command so that we can use it going forward. And then, right after we print out the command, we're going to add to this the parser and its output. So that's going to be parser dot command. And we saw that. Parser dot command. And that comes from in here, that comes from this rule. So we are calling the top level rule, and that should give us our parser. There we go. Error free. All right, so let's go ahead and try to build this whole thing out and see if we can parse commands. So one of our commands was config set name value. Oh, looks like it worked. So if I said config set name, should get an error saying missing arg at end of file. Now we're going to have some better error messaging later, but for now this is what we got. So repo list, yep, command repo list, index list. So quit, yep, quit this, yep, extraneous input. So it doesn't. It's giving us error message because it wasn't supposed to have anything after the quit. So it looks like we are parsing our commands, and so that's going to be it for this video. We've created the grammar, we've added the support for Antlr to our project, and we are successfully creating parsing the commands that we type in on the command line here. So in the next video, we are going to take the config command, config print config config list, I think, config list. So anyway, the config command, we're going to build that one command out in our next video. We're going to use a library that's going to basically parse input parameters for our parse configurations for us and write it to a file and so forth. So thanks for watching. We will get there. I know this is a slow process, but I wanted to show Antlr and its ability to define a grammar and to parse it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.